Chapter 2. Today we are going to move forward with what Krishna told Arjun about the Karma Yoga. So in the previous shloka we saw that the previous shloka 2.38 was the doorway to Nishkam Karma Yoga. Before this we were discussing Karma Kand, and before that Krishna was telling Arjun about the reality of our existence, that we are not these bodies, we are the souls. So that part also concerns with the Gyan or the knowledge of self-realization. Now let us see what Krishna says to Arjun today in 2.39. First let's say the prayers. Om Agyanitimirandhasya Gyananjan Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshtarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So back with the magic mantra, on to shloka number 2.39. So what does it read? It reads as follows. Esha te abhihita sankhye buddhir yoge tva imam shrunu buddhaya yukto yaya partha karma bandham prahasyasi. Note the last 1/4 part of the shloka. Karma bandham prahasyasi. Karma bandhan, bondage of reaction. Prahasyasi, you can be released from. This is what we are all waiting for. To be released from the bondage of what binds us to this material world, aren't we? Well, Srila Prabhupada here is actually giving quite a detailed purport and a very wonderful one for that, very instructive, very informative also. So let's take up the purport, and as we go, we will try and explore what all Srila Prabhupada is trying to tell us. Now in the first part, Srila Prabhupada says, in fact, in the first part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining what is the meaning of Sankhya. According to Nirukti dictionary, Srila Prabhupada begins the purport with. Now what is this Nirukti dictionary? Actually, Nirukta or Nirukti is one of the 6 Vedangas. What is meant by a Vedang? Vedang is something, an ancillary text which helps you to understand the Vedas. So this Nirukti is actually a dictionary which helps you to understand the Sanskrit words and verses of the Vedas in a better way. So citing that dictionary, which is a bona fide Vedic literature, nothing which is concocted by our own minds. So Srila Prabhupada says, according to that, it describes the real nature of the soul. So what is the real nature of the soul? What is describing it? The Sankhya. Actually, the Sankhya word comes out quite often in Bhagavad Gita. Sankhya and Sankhya. Now, something which is being described in great detail analytically is referred to as Sankhya, right? But at the same time, Sankhya particularly refers to that philosophy that tells us about the reality of the body and the soul. As Srila Prabhupada is going to explain this further also in the purport, so let's take it up right here only. Later in the purport also, Srila Prabhupada says, actually Sankhya means the analysis of the elements of the nature, what makes up this material world. In actual Sankhya, the philosophy which was propagated by Lord Kapil. Now later again in the verse, Srila Prabhupada explains that there are 2 Lord Kapil. Actually Lord Kapil is only one, but Kapil, there are 2 of them in the Vedic history. There is a theistic Kapil and there is an atheistic Kapil. What do we mean by that? That's quite actually a coincidence, Kapil, who is theistic, means one who is actually a believer in God, Frankly, he is actually an incarnation of Lord Krishna only. He is the son of Mother Devahuti and Kardam Muni, and he is the one who explains the entire, the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the Supreme to his mother, in which has actually been listed and detailed in the Canto 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, this is the theistic Sankhya. There is an atheistic Kapil Muni also, one who doesn't believe in God and one who believes that entire life comes only from chemicals. So he also gave a Sankhya philosophy, but that Sankhya philosophy is totally nonsense, because it does not take into account that nothing can actually come into being on its own. Now, the theistic Sankhya, which is propagated by Lord Kapil, that's the one. And tell you something, this Lord Kapil, who's the theistic, who gave the theistic Sankhya philosophy, came much before than the other Kapil. So that's a bona fide, philosophy. Now, these philosophy of theistic Sankhya definitely tells us about the details of the elements. Now, as we saw that the whole world is made up of the 5 major elements like earth, water, fire, ether and air, and the entire detail of how these material elements, which are actually 24 of them in all, they make up this material world. But here Srila Prabhupada says, here the term Sankhya refers mainly to the knowledge of body and soul. So, Krishna is referring to this Sankhya here. How? Because from 11 to 30, Krishna had given the knowledge of the soul to Arjun, right? So, Srila Prabhupada said this is the Sankhya he is talking about. Now, then Srila Prabhupada goes on to Arjun and again re-explains the motivation of Arjun to fight. He says, Arjun, gives 2 reasons not to fight. One is that if I win, if I kill my relatives, and if I win, then also I am a loser, because I don't get to enjoy my kingdom with my near and dear ones. Even if I lose, then also I am a loser, because then what happens is that, see, the point here comes out that whichever way Arjun is thinking, his reason for fighting or not fighting, this is all based on his personal sense enjoyment. This is what Srila Prabhupada is explaining, right? Later on, that ultimately, if we make all our decisions based on whether we are going to be the enjoyers or not, then we will end up in trouble. Because many times there is a call of duty, a call of purpose, a higher purpose, as Srila Prabhupada mentions later, that there's a certain wisdom and a certain duty that impels us to do certain tasks. But if we always neglect that wisdom and duty and do according to our whims and fancies, depending upon our own, grasping of the things as to our own sense enjoyment, right? So if we are taking all the decisions based upon that one fact, we are living a dog's life. That's what Srila Prabhupada tells us very clearly. If you're only thinking about that, you're actually failing the purpose of life. You must learn to do certain things above our, selfish, sense gratificatory purposes. Not everything, whether I'm going to enjoy this or not. Many times, okay, let's just recall. So many times in life, we know that doing this thing in a certain way is what is the call of duty, is what is required of us. But we shirk away from it, thinking, no, if I do that, then I might not enjoy the material riches that I'm having. I might have to sacrifice my material riches. I might have to sacrifice my bodily health. I might have to sacrifice, a number of other material, pleasures that I am very attached to. And frankly speaking, our current system of education is actually propagating this type of a thing, because what they make us feel is that living for your own sense gratification is the most important purpose of life. In fact, modern science gives us so many comforts, so many benefits, but ultimately these benefits are just to make our bodies comfortable, just to make our bodies more at home in this material world. But that's not the real purpose of life. The real purpose of human life is to evolve our consciousness, to actually break free of this material bondage. So, a higher purpose is what we must look at whenever we are contemplating a decision about anything. Then Srila Prabhupada tells us later that he's actually explaining that the theistic Sankhya, which is explained by Lord Kapil, is actually a very complete, exhaustive account of what happens in this material world. How a person gets into the enjoying mentality, and because he's very attached to the material pleasures, he actually starts giving up all the higher wisdom and higher sense of duty one by one, and then finally what happens is there are some people who say that, okay, I am just going to get liberated. Some people, they just get too frustrated because many of their material desires do not get fulfilled. And then when they become frustrated, they said, okay, we want liberation. And after liberation, we are just going to merge into God, because we are going to become one with God. This is what is called Mayavad. So Mayavad, Srila Prabhupada is telling, is nothing but the last snare of Maya, last noose of the, illusory energy of God. Because the wish or the desire to merge with the Supreme is actually a very selfish desire, because it actually propagates that I am somebody equal to God, which is never going to happen. So that actually is I would say, the biggest selfish desire that a person may have, although it might sound and seem to be something very selfless, that we just want to get liberated. But liberated for what purpose? Because you want to equal yourself with God, to merge with Him. You don't want to do anything for God. You don't want to serve God, right? So that's a very selfish motive behind liberation. And as Srila Prabhupada is explaining towards the end of this verse, liberation is not something that devotees care about at all, because liberation is theirs anyway, and something much beyond that, Well, it's explained by Srila Rupa Goswami, the pleasure that one derives from devotional service or becoming a bhakt of Krishna is actually so vast that the pleasure of Brahmanand, or the pleasure of merging with Lord's, impersonal effulgence, is not even one small speck related or compared with that, So, the next part of the purport is a very, 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 I would say, informing and transforming part, because it's what actually explains to us what Buddhi Yoga here means. So when we hear of the term Buddhi Yoga, comes to our mind intelligence. Yoga means dovetailing, linking or joining something. So joining or linking or dovetailing our intelligence with what? That is what Srila Prabhupada explains here. Now, Buddhi Yoga is a very stretchable term. Now, throughout Gita, this term will appear, say, 3 to 4 times. But as we move on, another, let's say, a greater meaning to this term unfurls according to the context of the talk at that time. Because as we are starting, we are at chapter number 2. Krishna has just started giving Arjun the various options. He started with the science of self-realization, then he gives the option of Karma Kand, now he's at Karma Yoga. So he's still in the beginning stages. At this point, he refers to Buddhi Yoga in certain terms to relate with Nishkam Karma Yoga, which means work in renounced spirit, which means work but do not be attached to results or to fruitive action, as they call it. Fruitive action means action with your eyes on the result, on the fruit of the action. So Krishna says that if you work not being attached to the fruit of the action, then you will get free of this material bondage. But as we just discussed, the word Buddhi Yoga, the phrase Buddhi Yoga, will have a wider meaning as we go on. But it is something that Srila Prabhupada reveals to us in this very purpose. Now that's very wonderful of Srila Prabhupada, that he is actually giving us the gist of the Bhagavad Gita in almost all the purports, because he knows that we probably would not have the time to read the Gita in one go. So he's actually giving us the gist of the matter even in the earlier verses. So he's explaining here in 10.10, Krishna uses this term again, Buddhi Yoga. So here, although Krishna is still, telling Arjun the initial part of the story, which means he's just initiating Arjun on the spiritual path, on the eternal path. So initially he says, okay Arjun, just work with a sense of wisdom and duty without your attachment to the results of the action. In other words, don't be attached to your own sense gratification. Don't work because you have your own sense gratification in your mind. Work because you want to make me satisfied. Or here he doesn't use the word me. That comes much later. But this is what he means indirectly here. That we need to work for the satisfaction of the Supreme, not for our own sense gratification. So that's called Nishkam Karma Yoga, right? However, knowing that we are working for the satisfaction of the Supreme ultimately leads us to Bhakti Yoga. That is the highest form of yoga, So as the ladder goes, we first have the Karma Kand. Karma Kand is not a part of the yoga, right? Because at that time we are merely working for material pleasures. But apart from that, when we move one step higher to Karma Yoga, it is the starting of the yoga ladder. And then from Karma Yoga, we go to Jnana Yoga, Dhyana or Ashtanga Yoga. But this ladder culminates in the Bhakti Yoga, which is the highest form of yoga Krishna is, propagating in Bhagavad Gita. So, Srila Prabhupada is citing a beautiful verse 10.10 here, that the practice of Buddhi Yoga is clearly explained in chapter 10 verse 10 as being direct communion with Lord. So here, however, Krishna is just giving a hint of what Buddhi Yoga might be. In 10.10, Krishna explains it completely, that to work in Buddhi Yoga means to work in transcendental intelligence, not the material intelligence, not that intelligence which help you study the mathematics and the science and the material subjects of this world. It is not the same kind of intelligence. We need to sharpen our transcendental intelligence, which works in direct communion with the Supreme, which means the Supreme is directly guiding our transcendental intelligence. And that's how, Srila Prabhupada explains, that's how to a devotee who works only for the pleasure of Krishna in Bhakti Yoga, all knowledge is manifested from within by the Supreme Himself, who sits in the heart of every living organism. This is quite beautiful, because in the material sense of the understanding the things, we will probably never understand how, without acquiring knowledge from outside through these senses like eyes and ears and nose and tongue and skin, how can we get knowledge? Because this is the usual method of acquiring knowledge we are used to since we took birth in this material world. But this is, again, I would say, this is another kind of mathematics, another kind of science rather, it's a transcendental science. In this science, knowledge can be manifested from within our hearts, where the soul resides along with the super soul. So when our intelligence gets into communion or gets dovetailed with Supreme, we get the transcendental knowledge from within, and that is real Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. That is going to be the conclusion of the matter here, which of course is going to be concluded later. But as Srila Prabhupada is writing wonderfully, that the Buddhi Yoga is the transcendental quality of work that we perform. What does that mean? When our intelligence becomes transcendental, what we mean by transcendental? Something which is not material. So when our intelligence becomes transcendental by being connected with the Supreme, then all our actions are also going to become transcendental for the most or the highest purpose of satisfying Krishna. And that is what is Buddhi Yoga. So with that explanation of what actually is Buddhi Yoga and how can we transcendentalize, if I may use that word, or spiritualize our intelligence by connecting our intelligence with Krishna, with God, with the Supreme. This is how it can be done. And also Srila Prabhupada mentions here that actually this cannot be done without devotional service, which means unless we practice devotional service or bhakti. What is devotional service? Let's just have a hint here. Devotional service is trying to serve Krishna in the various ways. For example, trying to speak for Krishna, trying to hear for Krishna, trying to use all your senses for serving and pleasing Krishna. That is what is Bhakti Yoga. So when we do that, and unless we do that, our intelligence can never be transcendentalized. So with that, let's finish up for today. We'll see tomorrow how Krishna is going to give a long-term life policy. Well, there are different kind of life policies, and you must have heard of LIC, Zindagi ke saath bhi, Zindagi ke baad bhi, the kind of investments you might do in the spiritual realm. So tomorrow we'll check out in 2.40, which is one of the most famous verses of Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna is promising to Arjun and to all of us. Till then, let's chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and be happy. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram.